In the final scene of The Devil Wears Prada 2, Andy comes back to the office and she's wearing a cerulean knitted v-neck vest. If you watch the first film, you know this garment. This is the iconic cerulean sweater. It's the one that Miranda used to deliver the most quoted speech in fashion film history. The one where she traces the colour of Andy's second-hand knit sweater that she pulled off the rack back through the high-end fashion collections and down through the buying offices and fashion editorial offices, back through every decision made by people Andy claims to have nothing to do with. The point is, you think you've opted out, but you haven't. You were always part of this fashion machine. But in the sequel, the vest is back, but someone has taken a pair of scissors to it. Most likely Andy herself. The sleeves are gone, the once round neck is cut into a jagged V-neck, and it's recognizably the same garment, but it's been taken apart and put back together differently. Now that image is the whole film, and I want to tell you why. Now obviously there's spoilers in this video, so if you haven't seen the movie yet and you want to see it first to come back, but there are spoilers all through this. The film has one key argument, and it's plain across the entire movie. Everyone has a price. Every character will have a point where they will abandon all their principles and morals and ethics for a certain amount of money or power. Now, what's interesting in this is the restructure storyline. So the old guy who's the owner of the massive company, he dies. So his young son takes over the family business. He's cutting costs, he's questioning everyone's loyalty, he's wanting to go in a new direction. And I was watching this, but I physically felt it. Because back when I was working in a fashion buying office, I went through probably 3 to 4 company restructures. And it just brought back so many memories of that time. And all the words they were saying, like amalgamation and combined job roles, budget cuts, redundancies. And the funny thing is that the people, the buyers who had been there the longest, who would have the huge, massive salaries, got to stay. They were like the biggest costs of the company. And then the most recent people who came into the business, entry-level positions, buying assistants, that kind of thing, they were out immediately. So the restructure is and sounds like a business decision, but for the people within the business, it just feels like someone is tallying up how much you're worth. And if you're not worth enough, you're out. And the film is really smart because it doesn't make it purely financial. A lot of it is to do with status and power. And for others, it's about validation. There was this scene where Nigel is talking to Andy and she's wanting that kind of validation from Miranda for her work. And Nigel's just like, do you want a lollipop? Like, what is this? And he's the one who's been in this industry the longest. And he is just that key person who doesn't complain, puts their head down and works away, does not ask for any sort of approval or validation or a pat on the back or a thank you. And they're the people who survive. They truly are. And I've seen that in real time. The really interesting question is that with all of these redundancies and amalgamations, cost cutting, is that the glamorous things get taken away. So Nigel talks about how he used to go on 4.5-week trips to Africa where they were doing this incredible photo shoot with all these top models, and he would get to stay in these fancy hotels, and it was an incredible experience. Whereas now it's like shooting things locally or just in a studio and just digitally editing everything. And it made me think about what is left for these hardworking people who are being essentially like verbally abused by buyers and editorial staff, people above them who are power hungry, power tripping kind of people. Why would they be doing that job if they're not getting those types of payoffs? And it's very similar for fashion buyers, that now because the trend cycle is so fast and you can just buy samples online of those competitor brands that they would normally go on big buying trips overseas to Paris and Milan and Belgium and London, New York, LA. They don't necessarily need to do that anymore, right? Because that costs the businesses a huge amount of money to send 7 to 8 buyers overseas to all these incredible places. And so it made me think, what is left when there isn't that payoff anymore for those people. Like, why would you want to go into that role if you're not getting that kind of glamorous experience of what it means to be a buyer, which is those buying trips, or in this instance, what it means to be working within a fashion magazine, which is going on incredible photo shoots. So when you cut the budgets, all you're kind of left with is the brutal hours that you work and the kind of humiliations that you have to experience with a lot of the older generation who have been in the business for 20 plus years. I still remember turning up to work at 8:30, which is when we started, and leaving at 5:30, which was when we finished. Like they were the hours that I got paid to work. And if I couldn't finish my work within that time, then from my perspective, I'm like, this isn't my problem. If I can't finish that work, that's like a management issue. Like, I'm working my butt off for that amount of time and then I'm going home. And everyone would 100% still be in the office. I'd get in at 8:30, like the office would be like 90% full. And then when I leave at 5:30, it would just 100% be full. No one else would be leaving. I would be the only one getting up and actually going home. But the interesting thing about it is that it was a badge of honor. It was proof that you were dedicated to your job and would potentially ensure that you got that promotion or invited to a certain event or given credit for your work or something like that. And the film captures that so precisely. It was just bizarre for me to see it happening on a screen. Now, here's something that I noticed that I haven't seen many people talk about yet, but how color coding works within this film. How Andy and almost kind of everything is blue or grey or cool toned until we reach Miranda. She's walking up the kind of Met stairs in the first scene and she's wearing a beautiful red ball gown. But prior to that, everything around her and everything that Andy's wearing is blue. The costume designer on this one is Molly Rogers. And so Andy is in blue pretty much the entire film. She's in navy, she's in the cerulean color, she's in white denim with a little bit of brown for the accessories. And she barely deviates the entire film. Miranda is in red a lot. She's in a lot of kind of warmer colors, tonal reds. And it got me thinking about what that representation meant in terms of color. For me, I was viewing it as blue was about democracy, truth, journalism, working class, blue collar, freedom of speech, those kind of concepts and symbols. Whereas red is kind of fire and power and passion, but it's also danger and authority and sun at its most intense. And once you see it, you kind of can't unsee it. So definitely recommend going back and watching the first film and seeing that play out as well. Now, there's a moment in the film where Andy's talking to her friend and he says to her, "Aren't you standing a little too close to the fire?" Now, he's talking about her kind of thinking about writing an expose book on Miranda and the whole situation, the truth and reality of working at Runway and working underneath her. And as soon as I heard him say, "Aren't you standing a little too close to the fire?" I instantly thought of the Greek myth of Icarus. The story of Icarus is one of the most common, if not the most common Greek myth themes that shows up everywhere and in everything. Movies, books, TV shows, even just real life in general, because the concept of Icarus was about the price you pay when you become too power hungry. Or there's a term that they use and it's called hubris. So it's essentially about overreaching and ambition for oneself in a selfish manner. And it was funny because a couple of weeks ago I was reading this book that I thrifted, which is Classic Myths to Read Out Loud to Your Children, because I've got two little ones. And there's a little precursor in it saying, maybe just be careful reading this depending on what their ages are, because a lot of Greek myths are really horrible. And yes, they are. And especially the Greek myth about Icarus and his father Daedalus. I think I'm saying that right. And essentially, if you know the story of the Minotaur and King Minos and the labyrinth, is that Icarus's father was Daedalus, and Daedalus was kind of like a genius, and he created and invented the labyrinth that the Minotaur was lost in and trapped in. And essentially, he fell out of the favor of King Minos after he built the labyrinth, and him and his son Icarus were sent to a tower, essentially imprisoned. And Daedalus, being the genius that he is, had to think of a way to get him and Icarus out of that tower. So he used feathers and candle wax, essentially, to create wings so they could literally fly out of the tower and escape. Now, he said to Icarus that when we fly and we leave here, you cannot fly too high and you cannot fly too low. You need to kind of fly just in the middle so we can escape and you're not going to fall, and also you're not going to get too high. So Icarus is like, yep, Dad, I've got it. No worries. Let's go. And they start flying and it's incredible. They've never seen the sights that they saw when they went on that flight. And then Icarus just gets kind of too overconfident. And he's like, this is so easy. I'm flying around. This looks beautiful. And so he starts doing tumbles and turns and going down and going up. And then he realizes that he just wants to go higher. And he just gets so far away from his father that he can't hear his father's warnings to him to tell him not to go too high. So he's flying up. And because he's getting closer and closer to the sun, it gets warmer, and that heat melts the wax that is holding all of those feathers in his wings together. So that is the story. The wax melts, he falls to the earth, he falls into the water and drowns, and he's dead. So that is the moral of the story, essentially, is to not be hubristic and not be too ambitious, otherwise you will pay the price of that. But how this actually relates to The Devil Wears Prada 2 is, in my mind, Miranda is Daedalus. She is the father figure here. And Icarus is actually Emily. And the kind of dynamic between Emily and Miranda is kind of like this mother-daughter thing, in the sense that Miranda knows, or thinks she knows, what's best for Emily. So you'll find in the second movie that Miranda kind of gets Dior to force hire Emily to get her out of the runway magazine, essentially, because she's seeing that she's getting too power hungry. So that is her parental way of kind of managing Emily's hubris. And in the second movie, we see this kind of strategic play out of how Emily is actually getting her super rich boyfriend to buy out runway so she can assume Miranda's position, essentially. And there's this incredible scene where Miranda, of course, she knows exactly what's going on the entire time, and she does this amazing speech to Emily and says to her, you are not a visionary, you are a vendor. So it's really interesting, because to me, I'm like, Daedalus was like this genius inventor, and his fury after his son didn't listen to him is kind of like him patronizing, saying, you just need to listen to me and you'll be safe, because if you try and do what I do, you won't survive, because you're not a visionary, you're a vendor, in Miranda's words. So I found that kind of parent-child dynamic between Miranda and Emily just very similar to Daedalus and Icarus. And then at the end of the film, Miranda is talking to Andy about the cost of what her professional career has cost her, and that is being available and being there for her children in their childhood, which she has missed. And she's been doing this for 40 years. She's been in the industry for such a long time, and the industry got the best version of her, whereas her children got the kind of depleted, on the phone, scraps version of her. And here's what I actually think that says about the film and her role within the film, is that she has been mothering the whole industry for her entire career, and using all of those maternal instincts, as harsh as they are in particular situations, to mother her employees. And we can see that with Emily, and I can see that with Andy, and even with Nigel. She redirected Emily to Dior before she could have that kind of fall from her hubris at runway. She eventually gave Nigel the best decades of all her work for him to then build upon. And she really shaped Andy in a lot of ways that Andy still doesn't quite understand. And then that awful thing is that her children got whatever was left over at the end. And the really interesting part was there was a scene where they were in Milan, and they were in the building where Leonardo da Vinci's The Last Supper is painted, and she is already aware that Andy's trying to do all these things secretively behind her back to manage the business situation. But she says to her, there were so many versions of this Last Supper painting with Jesus and the disciples, but what's incredible about this particular painting was that Jesus was depicted without any sort of halo, anything that made him essentially divine. He was depicted as fully human in this painting. And then she goes on to talk about how it is just the human experience to fail and to disappoint people and to let people down. So she was kind of using this as like a metaphor for what Andy was doing. And I don't necessarily think she was trying to criticize her. I feel like in a way she was trying to convey the fact that the fashion industry is a dog eat dog kind of world, and that inevitably everyone is going to betray everyone else. And that Miranda is fully aware of that. Miranda, the person who sees absolutely everything, missed the two people closest to her. She has spies everywhere. She anticipates Andy's every move because she already knows what's going on. She read Emily's ambition correctly right at the beginning of her career and redirected it before it could burn things down. She is absolutely the most perceptive person that enters every single room. But she completely missed Nigel. There's a beautiful scene where Andy says, well, maybe Nigel can do the speech for this. And Meryl Streep's acting is just so incredible. I mean, we all know that, but just like the innocence and like the sadness in her eyes when she says, no, I would know if he wanted that. I would know. He would have told me. And then she looks at him and she realizes, no, actually, yes, he does want it. He's just too scared to ask for what he wants. In an industry where you get shut down or fired if you do anything like that. And she totally missed Andy's loyalty as well, because she missed both of them, because loyalty without any sort of vindictive agenda is just an absolute blind spot for her. She's not used to that. She's used to kind of calculating what everyone's moves are going to be and protecting herself and her own interests. And she's spent 40 years kind of reading those threats, and those people who were just there working by her side, faithful, they didn't register on her radar. And Andy refusing to write an expose at Miranda towards the end, even when Miranda says, write it, say everything, be truthful, be honest. When she says to Miranda, no, I'm not going to do it, that kind of cracks the whole thing open, because Miranda's really just handed Andy a weapon to say, here, like, do your worst. And Andy's just taken it and just put it to the side and said, no, I'm not going to. And Miranda's just so baffled by this, because that's not how you play the game in the fashion industry. It's always this kind of tit for tat thing, and people jumping on top of other people's roles and everyone undercutting everyone. So for someone to just be completely loyal and not ask for anything in return is just something totally new to Miranda. And then that cracks it open for her to see with Nigel that actually these two people who are not threatening in any way are my most loyal friends. Now back to the cerulean vest. Andy walks into the runway offices at the end of the film wearing the cerulean vest. Previously it used to be a long sleeve jumper with a crew neck, whereas now she's hacked it with a pair of scissors, very jagged edges, jagged V-neck, and completely taken the sleeves off. In the first film, the whole point of this cerulean sweater speech is for Miranda to prove a point to Andy that you didn't make this decision, we made this decision for you. You are just a product of what we decide in this room. But when Andy takes that sweater and that concept in a way, and she cuts it to fit her, to tailor it to her body, to her style, to what she wants it to do, that is in a way Andy taking agency and the narrative and turning it into something that serves her, that's personal to her and unique to her. And that's kind of a metaphor for what she's done in this film, is that she's come back into an industry, into Runway magazine, and instead of constricting herself to fit back into that dynamic and that working place and that lifestyle, she has changed it to fit her. So it's like this beautiful metaphor of how the vest being changed and chopped by her is just a symbol of what her character arc has been from the first film to the second film. If you've seen the movie, let me know what you thought about it in the comments below, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thanks for watching.